Racist cop arrests black millionaire. Just 2 minutes later, he strikes back with the power of money. The sun was blazing high over the busy shopping street that Saturday afternoon. Palm trees swayed lazily in the breeze, and families moved in and out of stores carrying bags of new clothes and fresh groceries. Among them walked Darius Cole, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 30s. He looked powerful yet calm, wearing only a pair of tailored shorts, a silver watch that gleamed under the sun, and a thick chain around his neck. Walking by his side was Amara, his 9-year-old niece, who clutched a small pink purse she had begged him to buy earlier that day. Her golden curls bounced as she skipped along the walkway, her innocent chatter filling the air. Darius smiled at her, carrying bundles of cash he had just withdrawn from the bank nearby. To anyone watching, the sight of a shirtless, muscular black man holding thousands of dollars might have looked unusual. But to Darius, there was nothing strange about it. That money was not for him. It was meant for a charity program he was launching that week. A youth center in a struggling neighborhood was nearly out of funds, and he had promised the kids there that he would deliver. As he walked confidently down the street, a ripple of whispers began moving through the crowd. Some stared, not because of what he carried, but because of who he was. His face was known in the city. People had read about him in magazines, seen his features in newspapers, or maybe even watched him in televised interviews. Darius Cole, the black millionaire who built his empire from nothing. But among the onlookers was one man whose eyes narrowed, not in admiration, but in suspicion. A uniformed police officer stood near the corner, scanning the crowd. His badge glistened in the sun, but so did the sharp tension in his eyes. Officer Daniels had always seen the world in a rigid way, dividing people by the uniforms they wore, the cars they drove, and often the color of their skin. When he spotted Darius, his chest stiffened. He saw a black man with thick bundles of money walking free and unbothered, and his mind twisted it into something darker. He muttered under his breath, "This can't be right." Without waiting, he began walking quickly toward Darius and Amara. "Hey, you!" Daniels barked, his voice cutting sharply through the laughter and chatter of the street. Darius turned, surprised at the aggression in the tone. Amara gripped his hand tighter. "Uncle, why is the policeman yelling at you?" she asked, her small voice laced with worry. "It's fine, sweetheart," Darius replied softly, keeping his tone steady so she would not panic. "Stay close to me." The officer's steps grew heavier as he approached. "Drop the money," he shouted. "Put it down now." Heads turned immediately. Shoppers stopped mid-step. A mother pulled her child closer. Phones came out of pockets. Whispers swirled in the humid air like sparks waiting to ignite. Darius stood still, his calm demeanor unshaken. He had dealt with prejudice before. He had been stopped while driving his luxury car, questioned at airports, and even mistaken for his own bodyguard at high-end events. But this felt different. This was happening in front of his young niece, who was too young to understand the bitter weight of injustice. "Sir," Darius said clearly, holding his voice firm but respectful, "this money belongs to me. I just withdrew it from the bank right around the corner. You can call and confirm." But Officer Daniels was not listening. His mind was already locked in on his assumption. "You think you can walk around here flashing stolen money?" he shouted, stepping closer until his shadow nearly covered Darius. Amara tugged on her uncle's arm, her eyes wide with fear. "Uncle, please, let's just go." He looks angry. Darius looked down at her, then back at the officer. He knew leaving was no longer an option. The officer's hand hovered near his belt, not yet gripping his weapon, but close enough to remind everyone of his authority. The crowd had grown now, dozens of people circling, their eyes bouncing between the millionaire and the officer. Some people whispered, "That's Darius Cole. He owns businesses in the city." Others shook their heads and muttered, "Why is he walking around like that with all that money?" "He's just asking for trouble," Officer Daniels barked again. "Hands behind your back. You're under arrest." The words sliced through the air. Gasps followed. A woman clutched her mouth in shock. Amara burst into tears. Darius raised his chin, his powerful chest rising and falling as he controlled his breath. The humiliation burned deeper than the heat of the sun. Here he was, a man who had built his wealth from sweat, tears, and endless nights of hard work, now being reduced to nothing more than a stereotype in the eyes of someone who refused to see the truth. I said. Hands behind your back. The officer shouted again, this time grabbing Darius's wrist. Amara screamed, clinging to her uncle's shorts. Stop hurting him, she cried. The crowd erupted with voices, some defending Darius, others staying silent, unsure what to believe. A few raised their phones higher, recording every second. Darius did not resist. He could have. His frame was strong, his body trained from years of discipline. But he chose restraint. He looked down at his niece, his expression calm even as the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Do not be afraid, Amara, he said gently. The truth always comes out. His words, spoken softly, carried through the silence that followed. The crowd stilled. Even those who had doubted him felt the conviction in his tone. But Officer Daniels sneered, pushing him forward toward the patrol car. We'll see how much truth you have when we run your record. Darius walked, his back straight, his dignity intact, but deep inside, he knew this moment was going to become something bigger. It was no longer just about him. It was about showing the world that dignity, resilience, and truth could not be handcuffed. And as he took each step with the officer gripping his arm and the crowd watching in stunned silence, he also knew one thing. In just a matter of minutes, the tables would turn. The sound of the handcuffs clicking into place echoed louder than the chatter of the crowd. For Darius Cole, that cold metallic snap was not just a restraint on his wrists. It was a weight pressing against his years of struggle, his victories, and the dignity he had worked so hard to build. Officer Daniels held his arm tightly, his grip unnecessarily rough, dragging him toward the patrol car parked by the curb. Amara ran after them, tears streaming down her cheeks, her small hands balled into fists of frustration. Please let my uncle go, she cried. Her voice trembled with both fear and anger. He didn't do anything. Daniels ignored her. To him, she was just a child who did not understand. His focus was fixed on proving his assumptions correct. He walked with authority, his chin high, acting as if he had just taken down a dangerous criminal. The crowd followed. Some protested loudly. He's innocent. That's Darius Cole. Others whispered uncertainly. Maybe the officer knows something we don't. Darius stayed calm. His breathing was steady, his posture unbroken. He knew if he raised his voice, if he moved even slightly in resistance, the officer would twist the story to fit his prejudice. So he kept his eyes forward, every step deliberate, every moment a reminder to himself and the watching crowd that his strength came from his discipline. Amara ran ahead, blocking the officer's path. Her face was red from crying. You can't do this. My uncle's not a bad man. He was going to help kids with that money. Daniels scowled. Move aside, little girl. This is police business, but the little girl stood firm, her hands spread wide. Her small voice rose again, breaking through the crowd's murmur. No, he's my uncle. He's a good man. He bought me ice cream this morning, and he helps people who don't have homes. He promised to build a center for kids so they don't have to feel lonely. Her words pierced the silence. People shifted uncomfortably. Some began to shout in agreement, supporting her. She's telling the truth. That's Darius Cole, the businessman. Still, Daniels pressed on. Quiet, he barked, his voice echoing harshly. Money like that doesn't just belong in the hands of men like him. He'll explain himself at the station. The phrase, men like him, hung heavy in the air. Everyone knew what he meant. Prejudice had spoken openly now. Darius lowered his head for just a moment, feeling the sting of those words not for himself, but for Amara. He knew she had just heard the cruel truth of how the world sometimes judged people not by their hearts but by their skin. Uncle, she whispered, broken, looking up at him as if begging for reassurance. He gave her a smile, calm and steady despite the steel biting into his wrists. Do not cry, Amara, I'm not afraid. And you should not be either. We will walk through this storm and the sun will shine brighter when it is over. His voice carried with the weight of a man who had fought battles all his life, not with fists or weapons, but with determination and resilience. The crowd listened, struck by his poise, but Daniels was unmoved. He shoved Darius forward roughly. Move it. As they reached the patrol car, a man from the crowd stepped forward. He wore a suit, his tie loosened from the heat of the afternoon. Officer, I know this man. That's Mr. Cole. He owns 3 businesses here in the city. He's not a criminal. Daniels shot him a glare. Step back before I take you in too. The man hesitated, then lifted his phone, recording. Others did the same. The crowd grew bolder. He's innocent. Why are you treating him like this? Voices called out. Darius, though restrained, spoke again, not with anger but with dignity. You can bind my hands, officer, but you cannot silence the truth. Every dollar I carry was earned with sweat, with hard work, with vision. That money was for children who have nothing, and yet you look at me and see only what you choose to see. The officer tightened his jaw, shoving Darius against the hood of the car as if to quiet him, but Darius's words had already rippled through the crowd. Murmurs of support turned to shouts. Phones captured every moment. Amara, standing only a few feet away, wiped her tears and stood tall. My uncle told me once that people will try to break you, but you can show them your heart is stronger. I believe him. He's not going to let this stop him. You'll all see. Her little voice, trembling but brave, hit the crowd harder than any speech could have. People cheered, some clapping, others chanting, "Let him go!" Daniels, visibly shaken now by the shifting tide of public opinion, tried to maintain control. He pulled out his radio, speaking quickly. "Dispatch, I have a suspect in custody. Need backup." But before he could continue, another voice interrupted. A calm, authoritative tone that made heads turn. "Backup is already here. Officer Daniels." A tall man in a crisp black suit stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. He was accompanied by two other men, both carrying briefcases. The suited man pulled out an identification badge. "I'm the director of the Youth Foundation Mr. Cole supports. That money he's carrying is a donation. Verified, documented, and already cleared with the bank." Daniels froze. The crowd erupted in gasps. Cameras flashed. Reporters who had arrived moments earlier surged closer. The suited man continued, his tone sharp but composed. "You've just arrested one of this city's most generous benefactors. A man who has built schools, funded scholarships, and given opportunities to children others forgot. And you've humiliated him in front of his niece and this entire community." Darius lifted his head high, his eyes locked on Daniels. The strength in his gaze was undeniable. He did not need to fight back. The truth was fighting for him. Daniels' hand trembled as he reached for the key to the cuffs. The weight of the crowd's judgment pressed on him heavier than the sun above. Slowly, reluctantly, he unlocked the steel restraints. The cuffs fell to the ground with a dull clink. Darius rubbed his wrists gently, but he did not shout, nor did he lash out. Instead, he looked directly into the officer's eyes and said calmly, "In your rush to judge me, you forgot to see me. Remember this moment, officer. Power is not in the badge. True power is in how we choose to lift others, not push them down." The crowd erupted into applause, their voices rising in unison. Amara ran to her uncle, hugging him tightly. "I knew you'd be okay," she whispered. Darius knelt down, pressing his forehead gently to hers. "And I knew you'd be brave. Never forget, Amara, the truth always wins." The cameras captured it all. What began as an unjust arrest had turned into a powerful lesson for everyone watching. But Darius knew this was only the beginning. In just minutes, he would turn humiliation into victory, not through revenge, but through the undeniable weight of truth and the strength of what he had built. The cuffs had barely fallen from Darius's wrists when the crowd's murmurs exploded into full voices. People clapped, shouted, and raised their phones higher. The hot afternoon air was charged with tension, but it was no longer the tension of fear. It was the heavy sound of truth rising. Darius stood tall, gently rubbing the red marks left on his skin. He looked out over the sea of faces that had witnessed his humiliation and his dignity. Some people he recognized. Shopkeepers, workers from nearby cafes, even a few young men he had once spoken to at community events. But most were strangers, ordinary people who had stumbled upon an extraordinary moment. At first, the voices clashed with one another. That officer was out of line. Someone shouted, "He didn't even ask for ID." Another yelled, "No, you all saw him, he had piles of money." What was the officer supposed to think? A skeptical man muttered, though his voice was quickly drowned out by others. A woman carrying grocery bags stepped forward, her voice sharp and angry. What the officer was supposed to think was that not every black man with money is a criminal. That's what. Applause broke out from one side of the crowd. More joined in. The energy was shifting. Amara clung to Darius's waist, looking around at the faces. For the first time since the arrest began, she felt something more than fear. She felt support. Strangers, people she had never seen before, were speaking up for her uncle. Her small heart swelled with pride. A teenager near the front of the group raised his phone high, still recording. "Mr. Cole, I follow your story online. You helped pay for my cousin's scholarship. He wouldn't be in college right now if it weren't for you." The crowd gasped. People turned to Darius with new eyes. The whispers began to change. "That's the man who donated to the hospital last year, isn't it? Wait, are you talking about the guy who owns Cole Enterprises? The construction firm? Yes. He employs hundreds of people in this city." It was as if a veil had been lifted. Where seconds before they had seen only a shirtless man with cash, they now remembered the headlines, the interviews, the good he had done. Darius raised a hand to quiet the noise. His voice, though calm, carried power. "I do not need applause," he said. "I do not need recognition. But I will not allow silence to be the response to injustice. What happened here today is not just about me. It is about how quickly people can be judged, and how easily dignity can be stripped away in the name of assumption." The words rolled over the crowd like a tide. Silence settled as they listened. He continued, his tone softer but even stronger. "This money I carry is not for myself. It is for children who need hope, for neighborhoods that need opportunity, for people who believe they have been forgotten. That is why I came here today, to make good on a promise. But what lesson would I give to my niece and to your children if I bowed my head and accepted false shame?" Amara looked up at him, eyes wide. She had never seen her uncle speak like that. He wasn't just talking to the crowd, he was teaching them. The suited man from the Youth Foundation stepped forward again, lifting a folder of documents. "Everything Mr. Cole says is true. These papers show his scheduled donation. He is one of the reasons hundreds of kids in this city have a safe place to go after school." Cameras zoomed in. Microphones appeared. Reporters shouted questions. The incident had turned into a press conference right there on the street. And then something unexpected happened. From the far side of the crowd, a young boy, no older than 12, pushed through nervously. He wore an oversized hoodie, his shoes scuffed and old. In his hand he carried a notebook. "Mr. Cole," the boy said shyly, looking down at his shoes. "You don't know me, but I go to one of the after-school programs you paid for. If it wasn't for that place, I'd be, I don't know where. My mom works 2 jobs. I'd be on the street. But instead I get to do my homework there. I get to dream about college." His voice cracked with emotion. The boy lifted his notebook, showing sketches of buildings. "I want to be an architect someday. And it's because you gave me a chance." The crowd went quiet. Even Officer Daniels, still standing stiffly by the patrol car, shifted uncomfortably. Darius knelt to the boy's level, smiling warmly. "What's your name, son?" "Marcus," the boy whispered. "Marcus," Darius repeated, his deep voice kind. "Keep drawing. Keep dreaming. Do not let anyone tell you what you cannot be. Because your future belongs to you, and no one has the power to take that away." The boy's eyes shone. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause louder than before. People clapped not just for Darius, but for what he represented, for the truth that money was not his weapon, but his tool to build futures. Meanwhile, Amara stood taller beside her uncle, her fear now replaced with pride. She tugged on his arm and whispered, "You see, Uncle? They believe you now. They know who you are." Darius nodded gently. "It is not about them believing me, Amara. It is about reminding them to believe in something greater, justice, truth, and the power of giving back." But even as the crowd celebrated, not everyone was at ease. A few skeptics still murmured, "It doesn't matter who he is. The cop was just doing his job." Others shook their heads. "No, the cop judged him without proof. That's not the job. That's prejudice." The tension swirled between celebration and discomfort, but one thing was undeniable. Darius had shifted the narrative. And Officer Daniels? He stood in silence, watching his authority crumble before the eyes of the people. The badge on his chest, once a symbol of unquestioned power, now felt heavy, almost meaningless. For the first time, he realized the crowd was not behind him. They were against the injustice he had just displayed. A voice rose from the back, cutting through the noise. "Mr. Cole, what are you going to do now? Will you press charges? Will you sue?" All eyes turned back to Darius. He paused, taking in the question. His niece, still clutching his side, looked up curiously, as if she too wanted to know what he would say. Finally, Darius answered, his voice steady and clear. "I will not let anger guide me. I will not use my money for revenge. I will use it to prove that generosity is stronger than hatred. That is the answer the world needs. The crowd cheered again, louder than ever. Cameras flashed. Microphones pushed closer. And in that moment, the story was no longer about an arrest. It was about how a man, stripped of dignity, had turned humiliation into a platform for change. The crowd's reaction had transformed what could have been another silent injustice into a powerful reminder that when voices rise together, truth cannot be ignored. And yet, in Darius's mind, this was only the beginning. The real strike back, the true power of money used for good, was still to come. The heat of the afternoon sun pressed down on the crowd, but no one was leaving. Shoppers who had once hurried past were now frozen in place. Some leaned against storefronts, others stood on the curb, and still more had stepped into the street, forming a wide circle around Darius, Amara, and Officer Daniels. It was no longer just an incident. It had become an event. An entire community was watching, holding its breath for what would happen next. Darius's words still lingered in the air. "I will not use my money for revenge. I will use it to prove that generosity is stronger than hatred." The crowd had cheered, but not everyone was satisfied. The reporter who had asked the question stepped forward again. A microphone in hand, her voice carried authority. "Mr. Cole, it's clear you're respected in this community. But the world is watching now. People will ask, what proof do you have that this was all a mistake? That you were wrongfully judged?" Her question pierced through the noise, and suddenly everyone wanted the answer. Officer Daniels straightened his back as if hoping this was his chance to reclaim some control. His jaw tightened. "Exactly," he said coldly. "Anyone can say they're rich. Anyone can claim they're a good man. But where's the evidence? Where's the truth?" The words stung like a cheap shot, and yet they revealed something deeper. Daniels was not just trying to defend himself. He was trying to hold on to a version of reality where his prejudice could still feel justified. Darius didn't flinch. He turned to face the officer directly, his deep voice calm but firm. "The truth does not hide, officer. It is always there, waiting for those who are willing to see it." From the edge of the crowd, the suited man from the Youth Foundation stepped forward once more, holding a thick folder. His polished shoes clicked against the pavement, and with each step the tension grew heavier. He raised the folder high so that everyone could see. "These are the documents Mr. Cole signed this morning at the bank," he announced. His voice was steady, commanding. "Here is the proof of the funds he withdrew, legally, transparently, and with full clearance. And here," he opened another section of the folder, "are the agreements for the Youth Center project. Mr. Cole's money is already earmarked for programs to help this city's children." The crowd leaned forward. People squinted, some even stretching to see the pages as the man held them up. Cameras zoomed in. The weight of proof was undeniable. Daniel's face tightened. He glanced nervously at the documents, but his pride refused to let him back down easily. "Paperwork can be faked," he muttered, though even he sounded unsure. The suited man's lips pressed into a thin smile. "Then perhaps you'd prefer a different kind of evidence." He gestured to the side. Out of the crowd stepped a tall woman in a navy blazer, her presence radiating authority. She carried herself with the quiet strength of someone used to leading, and when she spoke, her voice silenced the street. "My name is Angela Price," she said. "I'm the director of the City Council's Community Development Board, and I can confirm that Mr. Cole is not only legitimate, but vital to our city's progress. His donations built 2 libraries. His company provided jobs when other businesses shut their doors. And this week, his contribution will fund an entire youth complex that will change lives." A ripple of gasps moved through the crowd. This wasn't just paperwork now. It was testimony from a public official. Angela stepped closer to Daniels, her eyes hard. "Officer, you didn't just arrest a good man. You tried to strip away his dignity in public without evidence and in front of a child. That is not policing. That is prejudice." The crowd erupted. Cheers, shouts, clapping. It was a roar of voices rising together. Some people chanted Darius's name. Others shouted, "Shame," in Daniels's direction. Amara, still clutching her uncle's side, looked up at him in awe. "Uncle," they all know now. They all see the truth. Darius placed a hand gently on her shoulder. His deep voice softened as he spoke to her, but his words carried far enough for the crowd to hear. "Yes, Amara. But remember, truth isn't about proving yourself to people. Truth is about standing tall even when no one believes you. The truth shines brightest when it is tested." His words silenced even the noisiest corner of the crowd. It was as if everyone had stopped breathing for a moment, soaking in the lesson. Angela nodded, stepping back. "There is more," she added. She pulled out her phone, scrolling quickly before holding it up for all to see. On the screen was a video, an interview clip of Darius from a local news channel just a month earlier. The crowd leaned in as the phone played the clip on speaker. "I know what it feels like to have nothing," Darius's recorded voice said. "I know what it's like to be told you'll never succeed. That's why I give back, not because I have money, but because I have a responsibility. If I can change even one child's life, then I've done something worthwhile." The video ended. The silence that followed was powerful. Then came the applause. Louder than before, it rolled like thunder across the street. People clapped, whistled, shouted encouragement. A group of teenagers even started chanting his name. "Darius! Darius! Darius!" Officer Daniels looked around, his authority completely eroded. The badge on his chest no longer shone as a symbol of respect. Instead, it looked heavy, out of place, and almost meaningless. He tried to speak, but no one was listening anymore. The crowd's loyalty had shifted entirely. Darius, however, did not gloat. He did not sneer. Instead, he turned back to the crowd, raising both hands gently, signaling them to quiet down. Slowly, the chants faded into expectant silence. "I thank you all," he said. "But this is not about me. This is about what we do next. The truth has been revealed. But if all we do is clap, then it dies here in the street. Let this moment remind you to look deeper, to see people for who they are, not for who you assume them to be. That is how change begins. Not with speeches, not with applause, but with how each of us chooses to see the world." The words sank deep into the hearts of those listening. For some, it was a lesson. For others, it was a mirror held up to their own silent prejudices. Amara looked up at him, her young voice breaking the silence. "Uncle, does this mean it's over now?" He knelt down, meeting her eyes with a soft smile. "No, Amara, this is just the beginning. The truth may be out, but what we do with it, that is the real story." The crowd erupted once more, but this time it was not just applause. It was a movement. Strangers hugged, people shouted for justice, and reporters scrambled to send the story out to the world. And somewhere deep in Darius's heart, he knew. The humiliation of being handcuffed in front of his niece had been turned into a platform of strength. The truth was revealed. But more than that, a seed had been planted in the minds of everyone there. And that seed, watered with courage and dignity, would grow into something larger than anyone expected. The street had shifted into something like a stage. Reporters pushed forward with their cameras. The crowd packed tighter and whispers spread like fire. The truth was out, but Darius knew that words alone would not be enough. People forget words. They might leave the street inspired, but by tomorrow the story would twist in different directions. Some would call him a victim. Others would say the officer was just doing his job. But Darius had not built his life on words. He had built it on action, and now he decided action would speak again. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the folded stack of cash that had started this entire ordeal, and held it high in the air. The bills fanned out, crisp and undeniable. Gasps swept through the crowd as the sunlight bounced off the green edges. "This," Darius said, his voice rising above the hum of the city, "was what the officer saw. Not me, not my niece, not the man who worked from the ground up to build a life of dignity. He saw money, and he judged me for carrying it." The officer shifted uncomfortably, but Darius kept going. Money is dangerous if used wrongly, but in the right hands, money has power, not to destroy, but to build. Not to divide, but to unite, and today I will show you exactly what that means. The crowd hushed, listening. Even the reporters lowered their cameras for a moment, sensing something greater was about to unfold. Darius looked down at Amara, who wiped her tear-streaked face. "You remember what we were going to do with this money?" he asked softly. She nodded quickly. "For the kids, Uncle, for the youth center." "That's right," Darius said. Then he raised his eyes back to the crowd. "This money was meant to build something, and it still will. Right here, right now, in front of all of you, I will commit it to that cause." The suited man from the Youth Foundation stepped forward, but Darius waved him back gently. This was not the time for legal papers and signatures. This was about showing, not telling. He walked to the young boy Marcus, the one who had spoken about becoming an architect, and pressed the thick stack of bills into his small hands. "You can," Darius interrupted softly. Because you're going to help me build. You said you want to be an architect? Then today you take the first stone. This money is no longer mine. It is yours. And through you it belongs to every child who dreams of more. Marcus trembled, clutching the money as if it were fire in his hands. The crowd erupted into cheers, some people crying openly, others clapping until their palms stung. Darius knelt so his eyes were level with Marcus's. Do you see now, son? Power isn't in the badge and it isn't in the handcuffs. Power is in what you give away, in how you choose to lift others when the world tries to push them down. The boy nodded quickly, tears spilling down his cheeks. Amara grinned, her small hands clapping. See? I told you he helps people. She shouted proudly to the crowd. The moment was electric. Reporters rushed forward, shoving microphones toward Darius. Mr. Cole, are you saying you're donating this entire amount? One shouted. Darius lifted his head high. Not just this amount. The youth center will be funded fully by me. Every child who walks through its doors will know that even when the world tells them no, someone believes in their yes. And that is a promise. The cheer that followed was louder than anything so far. It wasn't just applause, it was a roar of hope, a sound that echoed off the buildings and spilled into the open sky. Daniels, the officer, stood frozen. His pride shrank with each cheer, each clap, each cry of support. For the first time, he realized what true power looked like, and it had nothing to do with his uniform. But Darius wasn't done. He walked to the reporters, his niece at his side, his voice calm but sharp. I want you to tell this story truthfully. Not just the part where I was handcuffed in front of a child. Not just the part where prejudice blinded an officer to reality. But also this part, the part where generosity overcame humiliation. The part where money was not a symbol of greed but of hope. He turned, his eyes scanning the crowd. Do not let the world twist this into anger and revenge. Let it stand as proof. Success is not just about what you have, it is about what you give. Angela Price, the city official, nodded firmly. Mr. Cole, the council will stand with you. We will ensure the youth center opens with your name honored, not as a wealthy man, but as a man who chose to use his wealth to fight injustice with hope. The crowd cheered again. Amara tugged at her uncle's shorts. Uncle, you always told me money can't buy happiness, but it looks like it can buy hope. Darius smiled at her, his deep laugh rumbling softly. Hope, Amara, is worth more than happiness. Happiness fades. Hope builds futures. She beamed, hugging his leg tightly. From the edge of the crowd, an older man stepped forward, his hair gray, his posture slightly bent. He wore a faded work shirt with the name of a construction company stitched on the chest. His voice cracked as he spoke. Mr. Cole, I used to work for you. When the recession hit, I lost my job. But you kept me on even when you didn't have to. You told me, a man's worth isn't in his mistakes but in what he builds after them. I never forgot that. And today I see you living those words. Tears welled in the old man's eyes. The crowd quieted again, listening. Darius stepped toward him and clasped his hand firmly. You built with me then. You'll build with me again. This youth center will need walls, roofs, foundations, and I want you there when the first brick is laid. The old man choked back tears, nodding. The crowd clapped once more. The rhythm steady now, almost like a heartbeat pulsing through the street. Darius turned back to Officer Daniels one final time. His voice wasn't angry, it was calm, resolute. Officer, today you tried to strip me of dignity in front of my niece, in front of strangers, in front of the world. But you only reminded me why I do what I do. You reminded me that prejudice still lives, and that means I must keep building, keep giving, keep fighting. Not with fists, but with hope. Daniels lowered his head. He had no words. The crowd's silence toward him was heavier than any punishment. Darius lifted Amara into his arms. She rested her head on his shoulder, her small voice whispering, You turned a bad day into something good, Uncle. He kissed her forehead gently. That is the power of money, Amara. Not to buy things, but to change lives. And with that, the moment was sealed. The crowd, the cameras, the officer, the entire city. They had all witnessed not just a man defending his name, but a man striking back with something far greater than revenge. He had struck back with hope. The air on the street was different now. What had started as a heated confrontation between one man and an officer had transformed into a living testimony of dignity, justice, and hope. People no longer looked at Darius with suspicion. They looked at him with admiration, with pride, with gratitude. But the story was not finished. Officer Daniels stood rigid near the patrol car, his face pale, his lips pressed tightly together. Every cheer for Darius felt like a stone thrown at his chest. His authority, once unquestioned, had crumbled in front of hundreds of witnesses. He still wore his badge, but it no longer carried the same weight. For the first time in his career, he was not the symbol of control. He was the example of failure. The crowd's energy shifted again, their attention turning toward him. Murmurs ran through the circle. Is he just going to walk away after this?
He needs to apologize.
Accountability, that's what's missing. Daniels swallowed hard, his eyes darting across the faces. He felt cornered, not by walls or weapons, but by truth itself. He wanted to defend himself, to say he was only doing his job, but deep down even he knew it wasn't true. He had judged, assumed, and acted out of prejudice, and Darius, he saw the man struggle. He saw the pride battling with shame, the officer's spirit breaking under the weight of exposure. Darius could have humiliated him further. He could have used this moment to demand punishment, to call for his suspension, to tear him down in the same way Daniels had tried to tear him down. But Darius understood something greater. True turnaround does not come from revenge. It comes from transformation. He stepped forward, Amara still clinging to his side, and faced Daniels directly. The crowd quieted instantly. Every eye was locked on them, every ear waiting for the words that would decide how this moment would be remembered. Officer Daniels, Darius began, his tone calm but commanding. You tried to take my dignity. You tried to make me feel less in front of my niece, in front of this community. But dignity is not something you can take with cuffs. It is something I carry inside, and no badge, no insult, no action can strip it away. Daniel's eyes flickered, shame burning in them. Darius continued, his voice steady and clear. You saw money in my hand, but you did not see the man holding it. You saw skin, but not the story behind it. You saw what you wanted to see, not the truth. The crowd hummed in agreement. Some people nodded, others muttered, "That's right," under their breath. Darius paused, then softened his tone. But here's the truth, officer. This is not just about you and me. This is about every child watching right now. Every young boy or girl who will one day stand where I stand. What will they learn from this moment? That power comes from humiliation, or that true power comes from rising above it? Silence spread. Even Daniels looked at him, unable to look away. Darius reached down and lifted Amara into his arms. Her small arms wrapped around his neck, her face pressed against his shoulder. He turned slightly so both she and the officer could hear him. I will not teach her that revenge is the answer, Darius said softly. I will teach her that when the world tries to break you, you stand taller. When the world tries to silence you, you speak louder. And when the world tries to shame you, you answer not with hate but with grace. The crowd erupted in applause, louder than ever. The cheers rolled through the street like thunder, shaking the very ground beneath them. People clapped until their hands were sore, some shouting, Amen, others crying openly. Daniels lowered his head. His pride shattered. For the first time in years, he felt the sting of humility, not forced by punishment but revealed by truth. He mumbled, almost too low for anyone to hear. I was wrong. The crowd quieted again. Darius tilted his head, waiting. Daniels swallowed hard, lifted his eyes, and spoke louder. I was wrong. His voice cracked, but he pushed forward. I judged you without cause. I embarrassed you in front of your niece and this community. And I let my prejudice blind me. I'm sorry, gasps ran through the crowd. Apologies from officers were rare. Many people recorded, knowing this would be replayed across the internet, across television, across conversations for weeks to come. Darius nodded once, his face calm. Thank you, he said simply. But do not say it for me. Say it for her. He shifted Amara slightly so Daniels had to look directly into her young, innocent eyes. The officer's lips trembled. He looked at the girl, her small face watching him with confusion and hurt. I'm sorry, young lady, Daniels whispered. I should not have treated your uncle that way. And I should not have made you afraid. Amara blinked at him, then buried her face against Darius's shoulder, whispering, It's okay. Uncle, he said sorry. Darius kissed her forehead and looked back at the crowd. This is what turnaround looks like. Not revenge, not punishment, accountability and growth. The applause was steady again, but this time it was quieter, more thoughtful, almost reverent. Angela Price, the city official, stepped forward, her voice carrying authority. "Mr. Cole, today you have reminded us all what leadership looks like. You turned humiliation into hope. You turned anger into accountability, and you turned a city street into a classroom of truth." Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras zoomed closer, and the moment was cemented in history. But Darius wasn't finished. He turned back to Daniels, his voice sharp yet measured. "Officer, you have seen today the limits of force, but you have also seen the strength of grace. Take this lesson with you. Change how you see people. Change how you serve this city. Because one day you may stand before another man with nothing but assumptions in your mind. And in that moment, remember this day and choose truth." Daniels nodded silently, his head low. Darius turned back to the crowd, his voice rising again. "My friends, today was not about me. It was about all of us. The way we look at one another, the way we judge or uplift, and the way we choose to use whatever power we have, be it money, position, or voice, not to tear down but to build." The cheer that followed was unlike the others. It wasn't wild or frenzied, it was deep, united, and full of respect. Amara whispered in his ear, "Uncle, you didn't just win. You changed everything," Darius smiled. "That, my dear, is the real turnaround." And with those words, the story moved from being about an arrest to being about a transformation, of a crowd, of an officer, and of a community that had witnessed the undeniable power of dignity. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows across the busy street where everything had unfolded. People still lingered, reluctant to leave, as if they knew they were part of something that would be remembered for years. What had started as an ordinary Saturday had turned into a moment of history, one that would replay in headlines, in classrooms, in conversations at dinner tables, and at the center of it stood Darius Cole, holding his niece Amara in one arm, his other hand still bearing faint red marks from the cuffs. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He was calm, dignified, and resolute, the embodiment of what it meant to rise above prejudice. The crowd chanted his name softly at first, then louder. "Darius! Darius! Darius!" But he raised his hand gently, asking for quiet. When silence fell, he spoke, not as a victim, not even as a wealthy man defending his image, but as a teacher addressing hearts that were finally ready to listen. "Today," he began, "you all witnessed how quickly dignity can be questioned. You saw how a man's worth can be reduced to nothing more than the color of his skin or the money in his hands. And you saw how dangerous assumptions can be when they are given authority." He paused, his eyes sweeping across the faces before him. Men and women, young and old, black, white, Hispanic, Asian. Every background was represented in the crowd, and in their silence he could feel they understood. "But you also saw something else," Darius continued. "You saw the power of truth. You saw how a community can rise when it decides not to stay silent. You saw that money, when used with purpose, is not a weapon but a tool. A tool to build, to heal, to give hope." He shifted Amara gently in his arms so her face was visible to the crowd. "And most of all, you saw what lessons we pass down to our children. Because this," he looked at her tenderly, "is who will carry the world tomorrow. What do we want them to remember? That hate wins? Or that hope does?" The crowd erupted in applause again, but this time many were crying. Parents held their children closer, teenagers wiped their eyes, and strangers hugged each other. Angela Price, the city councilwoman, stepped forward once more. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "you've given us more than a donation today. You've given us a living example of leadership, grace, and vision. This city will never forget what happened here." Darius shook his head humbly. "Do not remember me," he said. "Remember the lesson." He turned slightly and looked at Marcus, the young boy with the notebook of sketches. "Marcus," he called gently. The boy stepped forward, still clutching the money Darius had pressed into his hands earlier. His eyes were wide, nervous, but filled with determination. "Marcus is proof of the lesson," Darius said. "A boy who dreams of building even when the world tells him he has nothing. Today, I gave him money. But tomorrow, he will give the world something greater. His vision, his creations, his future. That is the power of passing the torch." The boy's small voice trembled but carried far. "I'll make you proud, Mr. Cole. I'll build something that lasts." "You already have," Darius replied, smiling warmly. The crowd roared in approval. It was not just clapping. It was belief, a collective decision to carry the moment with them. Then, slowly, Darius looked back at Officer Daniels. The man stood off to the side, head low, as if hoping the ground would swallow him. The weight of humiliation hung heavy on his shoulders, but Darius's eyes softened. "Officer," Darius said, "the lesson is for you too. Today you apologized, and that is a start. But do not let it end here. Carry this moment with you into every decision you make, every person you meet. Because your badge has power, but power means nothing without justice." The officer nodded silently, unable to find words. Darius turned back to the crowd one last time. His voice deepened, steady, like the closing note of a song. "Remember this day. Remember not the handcuffs, not the shame, not even my donation. Remember that when hate tried to humiliate, hope rose stronger. Remember that when judgment tried to break, truth stood taller. And remember that no matter who you are, no matter what you carry or where you come from, your worth is not decided by others. It is decided by how you choose to live, how you choose to give, and how you choose to rise." The silence that followed was almost holy. Then the applause came, wave after wave of clapping, cheering, shouting. Some people chanted his name again. Others simply stood in awe. Amara kissed her uncle's cheek and whispered, "Uncle, you turned a bad thing into a story that will help everyone." Darius smiled, his eyes glistening. "That, Amara, is the lesson. Never let the world write your story for you. Write it yourself, and write it with hope." With that, he took her hand and began walking away from the crowd. The cameras followed, the chants grew louder, but Darius didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew the lesson had been planted, and it would grow in every heart that had witnessed it. And in the days that followed, the world would talk about it endlessly. Headlines would read, "Millionaire arrested turns humiliation into hope." Videos would go viral. Debates would rage. But through it all, one truth would stand unshaken. That day on that street, a man had shown the world that true power does not come from force, revenge, or wealth. True power comes from turning pain into purpose, turning injustice into inspiration, and turning humiliation into a lesson for generations. And so, the story of Darius Cole lived on, not just in newspapers, not just in the youth center he funded, but in every child who learned that their worth could never be handcuffed.